Welcome to episode number 251 of the Canadian Prepper Podcast. We are recording on October 27th, 2024. My name's Eric, host of the show based in Southern Ontario, hunter, target shooter, ham radio operator. I know that's surprising. And computer geek. As a first responder, witnessed an over-reliance on emergency services during major events and started a small preparedness company to help people get better prepared for at least 72 hours, if not longer.
And good evening, I'm Jeff. I'm based in Central Ontario. I'm a target shooter, also a ham radio operator, general overall handyman, and weather nerd.
My name is Pierre. I'm a tactical beard owner, based t-shirt merchant, government critique, and the reason we hit the explicit button.
It's true.
And I'm Terry. I live in sunny Central Ontario. Official Grand Poobah of the annual Preppers Meet. Starving indie author, terrible hunter, pathetic fisherman, proud foreign owner.
Oh, I wonder, this is just going to be great.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Let's put it out there.
And if you want to support the show and maybe help Terry with his Ford, buy some swag. We have both the Canadian Prepper Podcast t-shirt and the tactical Velcro patch at prepperpodcast.ca. All the proceeds help us cover our podcast costs.
And if you're enjoying the show, please take a few minutes and submit a review wherever you found us. We want your feedback, even if it's bad. And we also invite you to reach out and tell us about something that you've learned this week. You can email us at feedback@prepperpodcast.ca.
All right, so we've got some radiating content for you in this episode. Yeah, into 251. Terrible jokes continue. We're going to start with some relevant news. We'll update you on our personal preps. Since the last episode, we're going to get into the main topic. We're nerding out on ham radio tonight. I'm excited. I don't know about everybody else.
Confused.
Fair enough. It can be a confusing topic. We're going to try and clarify a few things. All right. With that, let's move into the news. And I figured, being the ham radio episode, I'd throw in a couple of news articles right off the top for, ham radio things. So we've got one article from Hackaday that discusses the evolution of ham radio and how it's transformed over the decades. Kind of like television's changed as well due to the internet. Ham radio has as well. So one interesting article there that I'll toss into the chat. And then another article here.
You can get Prime on your radio now, is what you're saying.
Sure. Technically, it's possible. Probably not the most lawful. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Now we're getting okay. Yeah. I was just saying, like, my TV comes with Prime now, right? So, like, you're saying ham radios come with Prime because of internet.
You could get Amazon Prime to deliver your ham radio the next day.
Yeah, that's a dangerous thing.
There's that. It is a very dangerous thing. I've got another article here that just talks about radio becoming a vital communication network during disasters, and we will touch on that a little bit more into the episode as well, but there's a couple of articles to kind of kick things off.
And I've got a couple of quick things. We don't usually get political here, so we won't get very much political, but those who haven't heard, obviously, Israel decided to bomb Iran the other day. This is just more situational awareness thing. They're just, it seems to me they're trying to want to suck the U.S. into this war. And I think at this point, the U.S. has been smart to stay out of it. But again, situational awareness, especially being that November 5th is the U.S. election. And we all know what could happen with that, the days up to it or the few days after. There's always lots of grumbling about, whether there's sleeper cells out there and all that kinds of stuff and whatever. Just be situationally aware. Know the hot spots. Stay away from them if you can.
Yep. Not good advice. All right. We will move into what we've done lately for preps. So for myself, it's been everything around here is breaking. It feels like every episode I'm talking about something else that's broken. So the furnace decided to not fire up when I decided to turn it on here and test things out before the snow starts to fly. So, we got to use our alternate heating source. We got a fireplace here. We fired that guy up and, just kind of cut the chill out of the air a little bit. It's not terribly cold here yet, so it's not a big deal, but it's been nice to be able to at least test that out and kind of see that it does keep at least the main floor warm. And so testing the preps out every once in a while is a good thing. Reprogrammed my DMR radios. I've kind of steered clear of DMR for a while and found out about a new firmware for the radios I've got around here. Figured I'd test it out and see how it is. And it's unlocked a lot of cool little features and learned a little bit more about DMR that I didn't necessarily know before. So those that have checked out OpenGD77 before, that's a firmware that I've put on the TYT radios I've got here, and it's working quite well. Learned quite a bit. So it was a radio nerd out week, which I know is not odd for me, but.
There you
go. Pierre, I see you're madly typing here.
Well, yeah, I never do shit before we do stuff. Do it on the fly.
And there's the explicit button.
Why be prepared, right?
Yeah. So it's been a little while since I've been on under the weather last few weeks, still feeling a little under the weather and just busy. So we've got a new restaurant endeavor coming up next week. So been working on the backside, lots and lots, way more hours on my significant other's half compared to mine, but coming up with menus, shopping lists and all that stuff. We're going to be cooking at a restaurant, pretty much mostly control of the menu, cooking as we want. So that'll be good. So knowing that's coming up, got some flooring, some moldings up around the daughter's room, got the door handles finally on the doors, shimmed all the gaps, got the doors to work properly. After a year of being here and putting those doors up, we finally figured, hey, let's put that latch on. Getting stuff like that. Got the camper wrapped up for the winter. Didn't really use it this summer, sorry. So we didn't have too much to do to close it up. Still a few small things, but knowing that the weather's coming soon, trying to get a bunch off before we start working quite a few more crazy hours. Mostly for good and enjoying it, but yeah, it's coming up fast, as we all know.
It's going to be exciting when that gets up and going.
Yeah, well, it starts Friday.
Mm-hmm. That'll be fun.
Yeah.
For me, I'm still getting set up at this new location here, so it's
is that where the Ford broke down?
No, the Ford's still good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, it just hasn't left.
I had to push a couple of Toyotas out of the way to get in here, but that wasn't that bad.
They were broken down too, huh?
They were. I managed to get
Your owners were just inside drinking.
Maybe drinking my beer. But I did get my Fords undercoated and did some fuel rotation. But other than that, I've been just busy moving.
It's funny how moving will just get in the way of everything.
Oh my God, it's terrible, terrible thing.
You never realize how much stuff you have too.
Oh my God, I'm still throwing shit out, and I've been here for a year.
Mm-hmm.
It's ridiculous. I've never had such a hate relationship with stuff as I do now. Moving somewhere that's smaller than where we were when we were renting. We were very fortunate in how big the place was, and it was like, okay, well, we'll keep that for when you buy a house. So you realize you have a whole other bathroom set up, a whole other kitchen, a whole other living room because you kept all the stuff for when you buy and you're not renting. But now you've got two of everything. But then you also don't want to part with any of it.
Mm-mm. Yeah, you might need it later. You never know.
Yeah. It's bad, but it is.
And you'll throw it out 2 years from now, and then 3 days after that, you'll come back and be like, I shouldn't have thrown that out. I need it now.
Yeah, that's why I've still got my flooring in the shed, and when the 2x4s I cut on the wrong angles, I've still got those. But
it's important stuff.
It is. It is. Well, how about we move into the main topic here? So, figured that we would talk about ham radio again tonight. We've done a couple episodes now. I think we're up to about 4 where we talk about this, and they always seem to be popular episodes. And I always encourage people to kind of go back and re-listen to those episodes. And but but I know that people don't always go to the back catalog. So every once in a while, we like to resurface this one and talk about it again, and we usually get some new information out there as well, because things are changing every once in a while in the ham radio world. Not too much has changed, but it's always nice to talk about it and get it back up in front of people, because it's usually a pretty popular episode. Just a quick reminder, we do have one episode where we actually fired the radios up and did a live demo of some contacts and just using the radios and such. Won't be doing that one tonight. We're just going to be talking about some scenarios and some basics about radio and that kind of stuff. So if you want to hear what it actually sounds like, go back in the back catalog and check out that episode. That was a fun one. That took a lot of setup too, but it was a fun one to do.
That was good.
Yeah, that was like 3 hours of pre-show kind of setup, and the night before,
the day before, and then 20 minutes of figuring out why it didn't work the next day, even though it worked the next day. The way
it goes when you do a live show. We might do another one like that down the road, but this one's going to be more just kind of walking you through the world of ham radio, based on Canadian setups and regulations and such, which can maybe help you kind of figure things out, because there's a lot of information out there on the American licensing system, and some of it's similar, some of it's different. So we're going to be focusing obviously on the Canadian licensing system and the use of ham radio within Canada. We'll be touching on as well a little bit of outside and some examples of things that have happened elsewhere as well. So the first thing here is ham radio obviously stands out as a dependable form of communication in emergency scenarios, right? Where your traditional systems kind of fall apart or aren't working. So like your cell phone networks, your internet, your landline telephones, that sort of thing. When those systems start to fall apart or get overwhelmed or just simply not working anymore because maybe the power's out or that section of infrastructure is destroyed or just something has rendered it inoperable, ham radio kind of stands out as the more resilient kind of setup, mainly because you can set it up with very basic equipment on your own. You don't need a whole lot of things to make it work and get it to go, and we'll touch on that a little bit later on. And, in critical situations, we talk about this stuff all the time on the podcast, wildfires, severe weather, large scale power outages. Ham radio actually acts as a fallback in emergencies communication systems for a good number of municipalities, and provides that critical communications when those common day communications options are kind of no longer available. So you'll see it used in natural disasters. The most recent natural disaster would be North Carolina, right? With that disaster just recently happened, there was a huge usage of ham radio for just doing communications and getting people in contact with each other. And it was streamed. It made international news. It was streamed on Broadcastify. I think we talked about it a couple of times in a couple of little spots on the podcast, where just volunteer operators were just getting everybody connected and opening lines of communication. It was just awesome to listen to, and it was just like a flawless implementation of the system. A lot of things went right there with the setup, and they had antennas way up high and towers available to them that were powered and always on. So there's always things that have to work out to make that actually feasible. But that would be the most recent example of a natural disaster occurring and ham radio kind of stepping in. Again, you'll see it in power outages, network failures. Big example of that is the 2003 blackout that pretty much all of us went through on the panel, and most of the listeners as well will remember that happening. But ham radio was used there as well to just help make connections and communication, because the cell systems were either non-functional or overloaded. The power grid was obviously down for a significant period of time, but ham operators were able to continue communicating throughout that. So the one thing that is always asked, and a lot of people are asking about anytime I start talking about ham radio, is understanding the licensing structure. And yes, there's a license. Yes, the government will get your name. Yes, you will be on a list.
And yes,
you're already on a. And yes, you pay taxes. You're already on a list. You're listening to this podcast, but and licensing is there for a bunch of good reasons. Some, we can battle about the bad reasons as well and whatever. But for the most part, it's good. mainly to make sure that you know how to hook things up and you know how the basics of the system works. So you don't hurt yourself or somebody else is really the big part of that. In Canada, ham operators can obtain either a basic or advanced license. That's it. You'll hear in the US, you'll hear about it's 3 different levels. You got general, I can't remember the other ones, but there's 3 total. I know there's general in the middle there, but in Canada, there's just the 2. So you got your basic, you got your advanced. Now, if you score 80% or higher on the basic exam, you get what's called basic with honors. So technically there's 3. Just to add a little bit of confusion in there. But so 79% or between, I believe the passing score is 50 to 79%. You're getting your basic. 80% or higher, you get your basic with honors. Then you can step into your advanced license, which not a lot of people go for that because once you get your basic with honors, all your frequencies are opened up to you. You can pretty much do anything you want. Outside of, you get some higher powered equipment, you can build your own custom systems with your advanced license. You have some technical flexibility, so that can be advantageous to the preparedness minded people because you can build your own stuff, right? Whereas with the basic or basic with honors, you can still assemble kits, so they have to be commercially available, so they're designed by somebody else that knows what they're doing, hopefully, because they're selling a kit. But so you can assemble those commercially available kits, but with an advanced license, now you can actually design your own, which is quite useful if you're preparedness minded and you want to be able to, make your own stuff and have it ready to be deployed in whatever scenario it is that you're preparing for. You can build a custom system specifically for whatever it is that you are preparing for. The process for obtaining an exam, not overly complicated. The hardest part really is finding an examiner, and there will be one in your community. Throughout COVID, actually opened up online examinations, so that's made life a lot easier. You don't have to hunt down an examiner somewhere within your community. You can simply hop on the interwebs and usually head over to the Radio Amateurs of Canada website, or commonly referred to as RAC, and they've got a whole list of examiners that you can reach out to, and you can do the exam right over the internet, which makes life a lot easier for a lot of people, especially in rural type of communities where you might be traveling for a significant distance in order to be able to write your exam. The Canadian Amateur Radio Exam Generator, this is where it gets kind of interesting. You can actually hop on Google and just punch that in Google, the Canadian Amateur Radio Exam Generator. It will take you to the Industry Canada website where it'll say, okay, do you want to create an exam, like a practice exam, or just look at certain areas of the exam? That's the actual questions. That is actually what you will be presented when you do the exam, which is fantastic for studying. I'd suggest you actually look at a course or look at a textbook and get the knowledge of the theory and such. But if you really want to make sure you're going to pass that exam, you can just cram through those exams over and over and over and over and over and memorize the questions. And that's exactly what you're going to walk into come exam day. So your basic exam, you're looking at 100 multiple choice questions. Your advanced exam, you're looking at 50. But I would stress that, doing that, you're going to pass the exam, but you're going to walk out with, well, I know how to answer the questions. You're not necessarily going to know the theory behind everything. But if you're anything like me, it's you learn by actually doing versus reading the textbook. So, you got to gauge kind of yourself and how you're going to learn, how you're going to do things. But at least know the safety and the theory behind things, is you don't want to end up licensed and then end up zapping yourself because you didn't realize that you're not supposed to lick that thing that's coming out of the radio while you're pushing the transmit button. Don't lick anything in amateur radio, though. It's a bad idea.
What about if you get your advanced?
Yeah, so advanced is the same thing. So you can go again to the Canadian Amateur Radio Exam Generator, and all the advanced questions are also publicly available. So you can either do the generator where it'll actually present you with 100 questions or 50 for advanced, and you can go through and do the multiple choice, and then it'll give you back a report at the end and say, how many you got right, how many you got wrong. But But yeah, same thing for the advanced. They're all publicly available questions. The pool is published. There's a ton of questions in both the pools, so being able to memorize absolutely everything is probably not going to happen unless you got a photographic memory. Then, well, good for you. And but
So it's
they're
similar
all
to-
publicly available.
So similar to like the G1 test, right? Like everybody goes online and does a bunch of practice tests or whatever. It tells you what you got wrong and where you went wrong, and you can hopefully read the question, understand. Oh, I misread that.
Yeah.
That happens with me a lot. I've done when I advanced my license for driving. I'm like, oh, you got this question wrong. I read it. And I was like, yeah, well, this is the answer. And then they told me the answer, and I was like, okay,
Oh,
you
yeah,
read the
that is the
question
answer.
to
Yeah.
me. And it's like, oh, that's not what I read, right? Like that does happen to me quite a bit.
Yep.
I tend to read it once and answer from there, where sometimes if I read it a second time. So it does give you which one you got wrong, and then at least you can start digging into which sections may be more complicated, where
Yes.
you're like, I may need, a nerd to help explain it a bit more, kind of like on Sunday
Yes.
nights.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
It does give you that. It tells you kind of the section that you should be studying and what you got right, what you got wrong. So yeah, then you can revisit that section and just study up on it. There are Coax Publications makes a pretty good set of books, both the basic and the advanced study guide. That's what I used. Most of the people I know also use that book, and it's a fantastic resource. I think Jeff's got it there. Oh, there it is. Look at that.
Big green book.
So big green book. Yeah. And you know what? There's a lot of information to know, and just try not to, start diving into it, get scared, get overwhelmed, and just back away. Just, take little steps with it, learn little bits and pieces, run that exam generator, because that's really going to build your confidence as to whether or not you're grasping the information or not, and then focus on where you're having the problems. Radio Amateurs of Canada, or also referred to as RAC, they do online courses as well. They have lists of courses that are offered in different communities. So if the online learning thing is your cup of tea and you can do it, I know it's not for everybody. That course is pretty good. I did the advanced one. I know, Jeff, you took the basic one, right? Yeah. And they cram a lot of people into the course, but you have a live instructor there. You can ask questions. They record. This is the one thing they don't tell you. And I think we've mentioned this in every single ham episode we've done. They actually record the sessions and email them out afterwards. So if you miss one, you can watch the session after. But they do a really good job. And your local ham radio clubs will also put on courses usually because they want members. And to get members, you got to have people licensed, right? Any comments on the live RAC course, Jeff?
No, not really. The only downfall with it, my course was very large, and there was a huge disparity in the knowledge. And a lot of times I found the more advanced people were kind of burying the people who were just kind of trying to learn, and they were jumping ahead, and they were asking questions that would be covered the next course. And so it was a little bit, it was difficult, but I mean, I got a lot out of it, obviously, and I passed my course, so I got a lot out of it. But it was difficult at times.
Yeah.
So people,
it really depends on. Yeah. Fair enough. I try not to people on a daily basis, but it happens. Right. So it really depends on your learning style. Some people I know can just pick up a book, read the book, go do the exam, and they're good. Some people can do the online learning thing and it works for them, and other people need that actual in-person type of learning environment. So all of those are available to you. Just check them out and grab the one that works best for you. But at the very least, even if you're doing the textbook or the online learning, try to find your local ham radio club, because it will be full of people that, for the majority of them, they want you to come out because they want the ham radio club to continue on. They want the hobby to continue on, right? So if you make contact with them, you'll find just a wealth of knowledge and people that are willing to say, hey, you know what? Come on out. We're doing this day. Check out the radios. Hey, you need a loaner radio to test something out. You want to learn how to do something? Come on over. Check this out. Like, there's tons of operators, and they do all kinds of different things. with radio. There's all kinds of different, rabbit holes you can go down with radio. So getting in contact with your local club is probably the highest priority next to going out and actually getting your license. And you can do that before your license. You don't have to have a license. Just reach out to your local club and say, hey, I'm interested. Maybe you get out for a couple of parks on the air operations or field days or whatever your club's doing, and you realize, oh, this actually really isn't for me, and you move on to something else. Or you realize, oh yeah, you know what, actually this is pretty cool, and I'll continue with it. And nothing better than actually getting out and using the equipment first. A licensed operator can let you use equipment under their call sign as long as they're directly supervising you. So you can actually get on the mic and get on the air, and they'll encourage you too during some of the public events that operators put on. They'll encourage you to come out and use a radio. So get out and check and see if it's even for you before you put the time in the studying and getting ready, because maybe it's not for you, because it's not for everybody. Let's touch on just key emergency frequencies and networks within Canada. So this is always one that people ask about as well. Typically there's designated emergency frequencies that ham operators will transmit and receive updates on. Usually those obviously fall within the ham bands. They're crucial, obviously, for effective communications during emergencies, ensuring that operators can relay vital information and coordinate efforts with emergency services. So that's another interesting thing that I wasn't really aware of until I started getting into this and getting my license. Is ham radio is actually a fallback for a good number of emergency services as well. So if their communication system falls down or is just no longer operational for whatever reason, falling back, a lot of emergency services will actually have it in their continuing operations plans to fall back on the ham radio for communications. So, and that's a whole other rabbit hole you can fall down as well in the ham radio world, is training for that kind of stuff.
Yeah, like I knew a guy who used to be volunteer firefighter, and they actually had a ham radio on the vehicle with them and everything. And like, hey, who has the course? Nobody's got the course. Who wants the course? They needed someone in case radio something. They had a designated ham radio, I think, in all the vehicles or whatever, right? Like in a scenario where a little more rural, where sometimes radio reception wasn't the greatest, they did have that. So that was kind of cool to hear, but I got to shave my beard, so I wasn't interested.
Oh boy. So you'll always hear the term repeater, right? That's probably one of the first terms you'll hear when you're kind of looking around the ham radio world. So what are repeaters, right? So they're stations that receive radio signals and retransmit it, usually with a higher power. So this allows for extended communication ranges. Obviously, they play a vital role in emergency communication, where they fill in kind of the distance beyond line of sight for you as the operator. So you could have a repeater that's got an antenna way, way up high. Your little handheld radio or your base station, either or, communicates with that repeater. You say, your call sign and a message. The repeater then literally repeats it. So it spits it back out, and it will usually put it out at a higher power level as well. So your little handheld, like for example, this little guy here, if you could see it with my green screen, there we go. So this little guy here, Kenwood handheld, they'll transmit out at, oh, look at that little Baofeng. Yeah. They'll transmit out at say 5 watts, hit the repeater that's up on, has an antenna way up high on a tower somewhere. And then it might retransmit back out at 50, 100 watts or whatever it's set for. But it takes your signal and rebroadcasts it, right? So that helps with getting your message out and getting it a lot further than what your little handheld can do.
So before we keep going, I told you we were going to go down.
Hit me with the question. No,
yeah.
Go for it. Go for it.
So 5 watt compared to 50 watt. As I'm understanding, 5 watt will only carry so much, and it gets somewhere, and then it carries it further. Is that literally all it does? Is that all the wattage does for when you're transmitting? Wattage just transitions into distance?
It can. It's the best way of putting it. It's just the level of power or the strength of your signal. So it's how loud you're yelling, I guess, is kind of a way to put it. So like
I guess
5
it
watts.
does carry, right? Like it
Yeah.
carries it further.
Yeah, it can carry it further. It can go stronger.
Eric might get into it a little bit later. I'll be honest, I haven't gone right through the whole show notes, but
Yeah.
a proper antenna is
Yeah.
much more important than how many watts you're pushing out. You can get as far with 5 watts with a really good antenna. You'll get further than 50 watts with a crappy antenna.
All right. So now I'm
Antenna
more
is
confused
key.
than I was before that question. Right.
So,
So like that's all I was
here's-
asking, right? Like, so I've got
Yep.
the little 5 watt, which is technically locked, and I can't use certain frequencies on it because I don't have my license. So I can get on a frequency for a repeater with this thing if I do all the capabilities of it that I can't. So is that just like I send a signal, my antenna, and it reaches that antenna, and then the bigger antenna with the more power, right? Everything aligned just transmits that further than what my antenna is capable of. Is that pretty much what a repeater does in a nutshell?
in a nutshell. Yeah.
Okay.
And it depends on what we're talking about too, because we're going to get like UHF, VHF versus HF, right? Like, so UHF, VHF, you're going to use for like your handhelds, right? These guys are going to run UHF, VHF for the most point. That's line of sight communication. So this antenna, this radio has to be able to see what it's transmitting to. We get into HF, high frequency. Your 5 watts I could talk to potentially Australia from here, being Central Ontario. Right. It's now the conditions all have to be really good, and it's going to be tricky to happen, but you can make contacts into the United States fairly easily. So it depends on the system that you're running as well, and the frequencies you're running on. And with any real good technical or IT answer, it's always going to be, it depends, which I know drives people insane, but there it is. So common repeater frequencies, you're going to hear VHF, 2 meter band. So that's 144 megahertz to usually 148. You're going to hear also people refer to the calling frequency. So that's 146.520. And that is a frequency. So I can set my handheld here, or usually when I'm sitting here, I've got all my ham radio stuff here in front of me as well. So I've got my base stations for UHF, VHF here. I'll usually have 146.52 just on, and I'm just listening to it in case someone calls out, right? And some people will just call out because they want to chat. They want to see who's available. Some people might use it because they need help with something. It all kind of depends on what you want to use it for. It's not designated as an emergency only channel. So if an operator is just driving around and they want to see if there's anyone around that wants to chat, they can call out on 146.52 and just see if anyone's available. But I usually monitor it, and when I'm driving around as well, I'll monitor that frequency.
So is that just strictly Canadian, or is that like
nope? That's North American.
North
American wide.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if that's European as well, but for sure that's North American calling frequency. UHF, so the 70 centimeter band, you're looking at 420 to 450 megahertz, and again, you'll have repeaters on there as well, and same idea. They repeat the frequency out, so you'll have repeaters on both UHF and VHF, so 2 meter and 70 centimeter bands. And they're pretty plentiful around here. Some areas you have a few, some areas you have more, but they're handy to know. So if you don't know what repeaters you have in your area, checking out Radio Reference or a repeater book is a good place to start. So repeater book you can actually put on your mobile device, so your Android, your iPhone. It will use the GPS coordinates that your phone has, and it'll tell you what repeaters are close by. Now the database isn't always 100% correct. Some repeaters are closed down and it's not updated. Some new repeaters are started up and it's not updated for a long time, but it'll give you an idea of some of the ones that are potentially in your area. But again, that's where kind of reaching out to the local club helps out, because you can say, hey, what repeaters are in the area? Chances are they run one, and there'll be other clubs in the area that run repeaters as well, or other people. So it's always good to know which ones are in your area, because you can always at least monitor them. If you're not licensed, You can listen to how operators talk. You can listen to what's going on. You can listen to just the everyday banter on the frequency. And if something's happening, you guaranteed you'll hear about it, because the guys will get on the repeater and start talking about it. So it's good to know what's kind of in your area and what you can access with your handhelds or your base stations. I know I've used the term base station. So handhelds, these guys here, literally hold them in your hand, right? They're small enough you can hold them in your hand. You can walk around with them. You can put them on your belt. So you'll hear them referred to as a handheld or an HT or a handy talkie. Literally in hand, walk around with them. Base station's a little bit bigger. So usually it does a little bit more power. So these guys, the handhelds, are usually tap out at 5 watts. If Baofeng tells you it's 8 or 20 or 50, they're lying, but there's still a decent radio to at least get started with, right? So five's usually where the tap out is on the handhelds. The base stations usually are tap out at about 50 watts. So they don't run with a battery. That's the other thing. The HTs or the handhelds will have a battery in them. So that obviously makes them portable. The base stations need some form of power source. So you have to hook them up to a battery. You have to hook them up to some kind of shore power, hook them up to your vehicle, whatever it is that you can use for power. And they do use DC. So keep that in mind as well. So when you get it, it's going to come with just 2 bare cables at the end or some kind of a connector. You don't just plug it into the wall at home. You have to have some kind of a power supply
Inverter.
for them. So
Yeah.
Inverter, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Just something.
Yeah. So before we carry on, the 2 meter band and
Go
the
for it.
70
Yep.
centimeter band.
Centimeter. Yep.
Yeah. The second you start talking like that, it goes way over my head and I lose interest. So
That's what radio waves do. They go over your head. So
yeah, and they go through you and you don't feel them. Like, yeah.
yeah.
So like just in a nutshell, right, without getting into whatever, keeping it simple so that I semi sort of understand. Like
Go for it.
2 meter bands, 70 centimeter band makes no sense to me. And obviously I haven't done the course. I haven't even cracked the book. I'm going to be working 7 days a week real soon. So it is something I eventually want to do.
Yeah.
It's not foreseeable in my future, but like the second we start getting, like, you're talking the lingo because it's a giant interest of yours and you go down those
Right.
rabbit holes where I'm like, to you is just like me talking about how to set a valve on, or how to set anything on a motor, right? Like I just tell people like do this and they're like, I don't understand. I was like, what do you mean? Like I do
what
it
do you
day
mean?
in, day out. Yeah. Right. So just in a nutshell, like
Fair enough. Yep.
what's the difference between a 2 meter and a 70 centimeter? Like makes no sense.
It's the length of the wave. So that's it. When you transmit, it goes out in that waveform. It's the length of the wave. So you're on 2 meter band. It's 2 meters. 70
So it
centimeter.
goes up
70
down
centimeters.
over a 2 meter
Up,
span,
down. Yep.
and then it goes up down
You got
in the 70 centimeter.
70 centimeter. You got it. That's it.
Oh shit, I'm ready for.
It's not as complicated as it sounds, but
no, but right, like,
if it's not something you deal with, it confused the heck out of me when I first started. I'm like, what? So yeah, no, thanks for asking the question, because yeah, it's I'm used to it now, but yeah, if you're just getting into it, it can be confusing.
2 frequencies you mentioned in this, 146, 520 for common used for everyday thing, and the one in the 70, 446. So those are commonly used that say you're just getting into it. You did the course, but you're still very nervous. Nobody would, whatever. If you set those 2 frequencies, you'll most likely hear chatter.
Depends. So
that's where you're going most likely, not saying like 24/7.
That's active. Where you want to go and figure out where your repeaters are, because your repeaters are probably where majority of your traffic is going to be. As a licensed ham operator, you can transmit on any of those frequencies that fall within the ham radio frequency areas, but you want to go and find where your repeaters are, because that's where your club guys are going to meet. That's where you can throw out your call sign and you'll probably get somebody come back and want to chat with you. You can say, if me and Jeff are going out fishing, or we're going out hiking, or we're going out hunting or whatever, I could say to Jeff, hey, whatever frequency within the ham bands. Let's communicate there, and we can, right, radio to radio and cut the repeater out. But if you're looking to make contact and actually just talk to some people because you're just getting into it, figure out where your repeaters are, get those programmed in your radio. That's where you're going to hear people all the time, and then branch out from there. Because if you get on to like 146.520, which is the national calling frequency, chances are you'll make a contact with another operator. They'll say, okay, let's move up 5 kilohertz. So let's move down 10. Because they don't want to be talking for too long on the calling frequency, because that's just to make an initial contact. So then you can move up and down and chat on one of the open frequencies. But figure out where your repeaters are, go from there. I just wanted to mention Anarchy Television in the live chat here as a quick comment about the Baofeng UV25. It could push out about 10 watts. So that's good. I've only kind of played around with the UV5Rs, and we're going back these 5 or so years now since I tested some of those. And the ones that say 8 watts usually push 5.56 ish. The 5 watts usually push 4 to 5. Yeah. So it makes sense. I've had some as well that, say 8 and they push 3, right? So you gotta know what supplier you're getting them from. So get them from a reputable supplier. But the UV25 I haven't played around with, so it's actually pushing about 10 watts. That's impressive for a handheld. And then I see old man Scott in the chat there as well. He's just talking about the wavelengths. He says, picture the up and down wavy line. Measure the distance between the peaks. There's your 2 meters and your 70 centimeters. So some old man wisdom there.
Yeah, it still doesn't make sense, but I understand it.
Yeah, right. It's one of those things you can't see it, right? So it's kind of hard to grasp it.
No, like I understand it, right? Like I do electrical, and it's like, okay, how does 12 volts change into whatever? How do you make 4-6 volts into a 24 volt system? Like you don't see it, but you understand it. But I'm like, I still don't understand how it applies to it being transmitting on a signal or whatever. And yeah, that's because I haven't done the course and I haven't looked into it more. But it's just sometimes people get into things where they just understand it, where I'm just like, hold on, I don't understand. I'm like,
you could almost, I was gonna say you could almost, and I'm saying almost here, so don't take a run at me. You could almost compare it to your AM radio in your car. You have to keep tuning it. You want to listen to country, it's one station. You want to listen to hard rock, it's another station, and you're tuning. That's the dumbed down version, I think, of what you're trying to get at.
That makes sense.
Yep.
Right?
Like, yep. I think you're bang on there, Jeff.
Yeah.
Okay. Good way of putting it. So we'll throw in a little HF here. So UHF, VHF is local communications, right? Line of sight. I can, my radio can see the tower. I can see the other radio that I'm transmitting to. Let's throw in a little high frequency. So now we're dealing with worldwide communications, right? So I can throw a signal, bounces off the ionosphere, bounces back down, bounces up, bounces down. So it's not going to a repeater or any kind of infrastructure setup. It's solely relying on that signal bouncing up and down from the Earth, the ionosphere back down, the Earth, ionosphere back down, and eventually being heard by other operators with antennas that are listening to that specific frequency. So one example is the calling frequency on 14,300 megahertz. So that is the 20 meter band. So from the top of one wavelength to the other, 20 meters. And that's usually the maritime net. So you'll hear a lot of guys on there that do a net, and a net is just a collection of ham operators. So it will be formalized. So you'll have a net controller. So somebody that is in control of the communications, they will ask for usually what's called check-ins. Other operators will come back with their call sign. That net controller will acknowledge their existence, ask if they have any traffic, and traffic would be things like news or updates or information. And then they'll move to the next operator on the list, and the next operator, and they'll keep going in order that they heard the operators. So 14,300, the maritime net, you'll hear people on there quite frequently checking in and just making sure everyone's okay. And you'll find nets happening across all kinds of different HF frequencies. I usually hang out on either 20 or 40, just because I find them to be the busiest and I'm able to get the most contacts there. But you will find nets operating on there, and that's where you get into worldwide communication. You will get nets operating on UHF, VHF as well on your repeaters. Usually most of your ham radio clubs will do different nets throughout. Like, for example, in this area, there's a net that happens pretty much every day at 11 a.m. and again at 7 p.m. And everybody just checks in and passes information back and forth. But your community will have different setups depending on what your club does. So monitoring all these frequencies. So we've talked about UHF, VHF, and HF. You can monitor those frequencies for updates from all kinds of places. Usually your ham operators will repeat information that they hear from local authorities. They'll repeat health advisories, evacuation orders, weather updates, that kind of stuff. So it's always good to figure out kind of where your local area likes to transmit on, where those local repeaters are, and then some pretty standard nets on the HF side of things if you go down that rabbit hole, just so you know what to listen to and where to listen if something's going on, because it's going to be a really good wealth of information before anything kind of hits the media, because you're getting it straight from usually the people that are going through it are putting the information out on the airwaves as well. So it's a good spot to listen. Weather repeaters as well. So weather frequencies. So those are pretty standard across North America. So you'll find them in and around 162.400 to 162.550 megahertz. And again, depending on your area, they'll be different because they will space them out so that they're not clashing with each other. So figure out where those weather repeaters are in your area. They're quite handy. And you will get emergency broadcasts with them. You will get local weather. You usually get marine updates as well. So if you're looking to go out on the boat, go out fishing or whatever, you'll get a lot of information about what's going on the local lakes. But very, very handy for weather updates and such. So kind of figure out where those are in your local area. And again, they're usually in Canada. They're within 162.400 to 162.550 megahertz. And just make sure that your radio is not going to be transmitting on those, because you don't want to be interfering with any kind of transmission that's happening there, right? So, and then again, your local amateur radio clubs, they'll be announcing their repeater frequencies and designated emergency frequencies on their websites or during meetings. So, if you can't make it out to a meeting, like me, when our local club has their meetings, it's right at the time I do bedtime with the kids. I can't get out physically to the club meetings at this point anyways. But the local club does have a website, and they do publish their repeaters. They do publish how to access them, all the different things that you need to set in your radio in order to gain access to them. Because again, they want people using them, right? They spend significant amount of time, resources, and money to make these systems work. So they want people to utilize them. So they will be publicly posted. Just again, I know I'm beating a dead horse here, but don't transmit if you're not actually licensed. Well, times are good, right? It's a whole different world if there's an emergency going on and it is actually codified in the Radio Communication Act in Canada for being able to transmit for the purposes of relaying emergency information. So I believe it's in one of the regulations, section 48. You can check that out. I was reading it earlier. I don't have that great of a memory on this things. I was just literally reading it about an hour or two ago. So, but it's in around 48 in one of the regulations that actually says emergency communications can be done. And I found it interesting, actually. It talked about simulated emergencies as well. So during a simulated emergency, an unlicensed person can use the radio to communicate with a licensed individual to pass information about the scenario that's happening. So good time to be able to practice, because you're lawfully allowed to do it at that point. But make sure you read the rules and regulations around that and just have a basic idea. Really good example of that, again, is North Carolina, where unlicensed individuals were using the radio to provide information to the net controller to say, the following gas station has gas right now. They're available for purchase. The following restaurant's open for food. The following location has whatever emergency rations we need. So there were unlicensed operators that were passing that information along, and they were doing so lawfully in the United States because there was an emergency in the area. There was no ability to communicate any other way. So they were passing information along, and the net controller allowed it because it was an emergency situation, right? So that's how that worked out. But just know it's, I've said it a few times on the podcast, is if you can get licensed and get used to the equipment and how to operate it and how to transmit now while times are good, it's going to make your life way easier should you find yourself in an emergency situation, because you already know how to use it. You already know how to communicate with it, and you're away you go, right? I see Terry has jumped ship here, so we will see him later, I guess.
Probably a Ford.
Something to do with his Ford. Yeah, something to do with his Ford, I'm sure. Yeah, the tow truck arrived. Yeah. So building a local communication network. So this is kind of interesting, and something that people always kind of ask about as well. Community involvement is a big thing with ham radio. So you will see operators come out to things like Santa Claus parades, for example, or if they're out, if there's people out doing races, whether that be running or bikes or whatever type of community event going on, you'll see ham operators actually be asked to help with communication, because they've got the radios, they got the know-how, and they got the ability to organize those things. So you can become involved with community events through using the radio, and then that gives you practice, right? So you can get your equipment out there, you can use it in the field, you can see how it works, and just get comfortable with it. So that's an option. And if you need volunteer hours or anything, well, you can volunteer and do it, and that helps as well. And then monitoring emergency services frequencies. Now, a big disclaimer with this one: you don't want to transmit on those frequencies. You're usually best to use a scanner that has transmit abilities completely taken off of it, so you can't transmit. Please, if you do set one of your handhelds that can transmit, please make sure you disable the transmit feature, because you don't want to be that person that causes interference on an emergency frequency and then inadvertently has whatever kind of help that's going somewhere not able to make it there, or you're getting in the way of that communication. So make sure you know how to do that. If you don't, reach out to somebody that does, or even better, just get a scanner, because then that's not going to be able to transmit at all, and all you're going to do is listen. But it is nice to be able to hear those things that are going on around you, because if you know what's happening, you can be a little bit more prepared for it. You can be a little bit more ready. You can decide whether or not that's something that you need to be worried about, or it's not your problem that grandma 10 doors down fell down the stairs. EMS is coming. It's not going to affect you anyway. Too bad grandma fell down the stairs, but
also,
it's
if
not a
she's
big
got
deal.
some really good fucking jam under the stairs, you can get without her being.
This is true.
Cane.
This is
Good to
true.
know.
Yes, you can take full advantage of the scenario and be a terrible person and steal her jam. Yes, that's right.
Yes.
But you can also, on the flip side, you hear that the chemical factory, 2 blocks down, is on fire. Maybe it's time to do something, right? And that's probably not going to hit the news right away, or you're going to hear it later on after already there's a bunch of smoke in the air. So it's nice to have that ability to just hear kind of locally what's going on around you, but just with that disclaimer, making sure you're not actually transmitting on those frequencies, because you don't want to be that person.
Or you can be that person that is listening to it and realize that grandma that did fall down the stairs, but EMS is very far away. You might be able to go help.
The good person scenario. So you're not going to steal the jam, you're going to help. Yeah.
Well, you can still take the jam, but you're also going to help. Right?
So you're in the middle person. Got it.
Yeah. Right? You do a good and a bad, it cancels each other out. You're still the same person.
Well, 2 negatives equal a positive, because Terry did just get a second Ford.
Yeah, probably why he had to bail. But
yeah. Drills and practice. So again, it's great to get your license, have your radio. Now what? Right? Practice with it. You know, your local club will do things like fox hunts, right? So, and I'm not talking about going out and hunting the little red fox with the tail. They will take devices that will transmit every 30 seconds or 2 minutes or whatever they set it for. They'll take it, they'll hide it somewhere in the community. Your job now is to go and find that device that's transmitting. So it'll set it on a specific frequency so everybody knows what frequency it's on, and you go and try to find it. Practice using your skills, practice using your equipment, and practice finding something that's transmitting. Could be useful in the future, right?
So, in a nutshell, how
Go for it.
the hell does that work? Like, so is
So,
it like
yep.
a ping? Is it a ping thing where, like, you know, like we've all seen the movies where they're holding this thing and there's a red dot that's telling you to go this way? Is it similar to that to a certain extent?
So you would need equipment that can pick up the strength of the signal, and yeah, it's directional. So you would need some kind of a directional antenna, the equipment that can say, okay, yeah, it's stronger. So you would point your antenna like this way, and you'd see, okay, the signal is however strong, and then you would point it another way. Oh, it's stronger this way, so chances are it's this way, and you would just keep doing that until you eventually find the thing that you're looking for. That's a very basic way of explaining it, but that's
Does it tell you you're like at
kind of how you do it.
60% or 100% or
You
whatever?
would
Or
see you would see how much of the signal you're actually receiving, and then as you get closer, the signal is getting stronger, so you're getting closer to that device, and then eventually you're right on top of it, and then you find the device, and away you go. Anarchy Television mentions broadcasting is triangulation, so that's actually another really good thing. I didn't actually mention that in the show notes here, but we'll scroll off for a second. When you transmit, you can be found. So
I'm not interested anymore.
build that into your build that into your OPSEC. The longer you transmit, the higher likelihood of being found, right? So if that is part of your operational security, that you don't want your location to be found, take steps to avoid the ability of somebody to triangulate you, which means they're just watching where your signal's coming from, and eventually they can pinpoint kind of where you are versus where your signal is, and they can locate your transmitting location. So can be done online with software defined radios. So if you go to like Kiwi SDR or similar websites that allow you to use radios from around the world to listen, you can say I want to listen to this frequency, and then slowly have it kind of triangulate where you're located. So be aware of that, build it into your OPSEC.
You haven't convinced me to get my license yet. If anything, you perturbed me so far.
You can talk to me.
Yeah, but I got you on an encrypted app.
And
that's
then
not
encrypted
nearly
as
app.
much fun.
You think
What's
it's
Not nearly as much fun.
Oh, that one's pretty fucking good. That one is good. Like
I have an
out of
episode
all
for
the
you.
apps, out of all the apps, let's be honest, that is one of the gooder ones, for sure.
Do I have an episode for you?
Yeah. Fuck.
All right, so let's talk quick about just building a go kit or an emergency kit, or whatever you want to call it, a kit that you're going to rely on. It should hit the fan. So first off, a reliable radio of some sort, right? So be that whatever it is you feel it is. If that's your Baofeng, great. If it's an ICOM, a Yaesu, a Kenwood, that works as well. It's whatever you're comfortable with and whatever will work when you need it to work, right? A lot of people dump on the Baofeng radios. It's up to you. It's what is it, a $50, $60 radio, depending on where you get it from.
That's a lot. That's also because a lot of Baofangs came from Wish about 6-7 years ago. So that's there's probably a giant thing with that that they were available on Wish for $12.
And some are good, some are not. Like, it depends on where they were sourced from, right? It ultimately, like, we can go on and on and on about the reliability of the Baofeng radio, but they have been used in some pretty cool emergency situations. So if it's reliable to you, use it. It's better than no radio, right? You get into the different builds of handhelds, the TYTs, ICOMs, Yaesus, Kenwoods. you're starting to get into some serious money, right? So whatever works for you, whatever you feel is going to be reliable, have that reliable handheld ready to go. Ideally, UHF, VHF, that's water resistant and has a long battery life, right? Those are going to be kind of your two things, because if you're going to be out in the environment, you don't want to get a downpour of rain and have your radio destroyed. So something that's got that water resistance and has a decent battery life, or carry an extra battery. That's something you can do as well. Portable antenna, right? So Jeff mentioned earlier, antenna is key. First thing is your radio. The next thing is the antenna, because without a good antenna, you may as well just throw the radio in the drawer and not use it. So you'll want a high gain portable antenna of some sort. Can improve your ability to hear and your ability to transmit and the clarity of your transmission. So
what do
you
you
want
mean
something
by high
that's
gain?
that's good.
What do you
So it's
mean
just
by,
able to. Go ahead.
No, I was just like, high gain. Is that just like you Google high gain
So
antenna and you find something, or?
Yep.
What?
It's the
Okay.
gain on the antenna. So essentially what it can hear, how well it can hear things, and then how well it can transmit that signal back out. Because you'll get some cheapy antennas off of Amazon, for example, or eBay or Wish or whatever online retailer.
Yeah.
You'll buy them for like $5 or $10. And when you go to transmit, 90% of the power you transmit out bounces back into the radio, because they're not actually that efficient. Right? So you want something that is name brand, it's been tested, it gets good reviews. You're going to spend a little bit more on the antenna, but it's actually going to do the thing. It's actually going to do the transmitting. It's not going to ruin your radio, right? Because that's not good. If all the power goes up the antenna and bounces back down to the radio, you'll end up frying the finals on the radio, and you don't want to do that, because then the radio is no good anymore. So having something that's good, and don't cheap out on the antenna, I guess is the best way I can put it. Spend the extra money, get the name brand antenna, or get the one that's got all the good reviews. Your local ham radio club guys can kind of point you in the right direction, or whatever store you may use for ham radio equipment, like Radio World or GPS Central. Those guys are good. They can point you in the right direction for things. And
I got
and
a
get you
store
going, right?
like that about 2 kilometers from my house.
Oh,
I almost bought the house next to it when we were looking for a house. Yeah, so the
that
guy
would be a dangerous house for me.
the guy sells ham radio stuff and all that stuff, and I'm just like, I drive by and I'm like, oh, the gate's open. He's open. I was like, fuck, if I go in there, I'm gonna go down some rabbit holes, and this guy's just gonna be like, how did this guy get dressed without hurting himself? Because I got like so many questions that don't make sense. But it's like, yeah, it's one of those things where I'm just like, we can talk about anything at that point, right? Like, you buy a Ford, you're gonna get what you pay for,
Mhm.
compared to buying a GM, right? Like, similar to buying a quality antenna compared to the Wish one.
Yep.
And,
Exactly.
and just
And that's
remembering too, when you were talking earlier, Pierre, about power and the wattage and whatever, you can throw 100 watts at an antenna, and you'll understand this if you take the course. It's called an SWR, where it matches your radio with your antenna. If your SWR is way off, you're not throwing out 100 watts. You may be throwing out 15 by the time it gets out of the antenna. So you're wasting all of that power, and you're not getting anything out of it.
and a lot of it's bouncing back at your radio.
Exactly.
Eventually it'll fry it.
Yep.
The next thing you want to kind of think about in your Go kit is, how are you going to power this radio, right? So you'll want some portable battery packs, maybe a solar charger, depending on your scenario and what fits for you. But a way to power it, and especially if you're getting into the HF world for portable pack, yeah, you need that 12-volt battery to power it. You need some source to keep that battery charged. So just having those things is important for a Go pack. So some kind of battery for either your handhelds, your base stations, or your HF setup. Very important, along with the antenna.
So, two things. One of them, the comment that's up there. Someone built a repeater with two Bofangs. I don't know what tinfoil
Yes.
and duct tape you talked about. That's got me more confused. I don't want to get into the weeds. Does it make sense, Eric?
It makes sense. Yes.
Okay. Now battery packs. We've all got some sort of cordless battery tools that normally run on an 18 or 20 volt system. Have you attempted or seen any systems that would be able to decipher it down? Like I've got some little USB. I don't know if you can see it. Like they're dual USBs, but with the transmitters, as long as you don't put over a certain amount of voltage, it'll bump it down to the voltage you want. Have you had
Okay. Yep.
any success in getting
I've
a
not played with
18
those.
volt, like an 18 volt? I run Milwaukee for what I do, so I'm like I've got like a 9 amp battery that'll last crazy amount of hours. But technically, it's 18 volts, not a 12. So I'm like, if there's a way that I can bump that down to a 12 volt via, transistors and microchips or whatever. Have you
that I
done any of
haven't
that?
played around with? No, I just go straight
you heard of it?
for just the batteries. That I haven't. No, I haven't. Well, I know you can step down the power. I haven't
Yeah.
heard of people taking like the Milwaukee batteries and switching them in to operate radios. That I haven't heard of. Not saying it hasn't been done, but
I have a challenge for you by next week.
go
No,
buy
but
some Milwaukee batteries and power my radios.
Well, it's not even Milwaukee. It's just, most of them are all 18 volts. Right. But at the same time, for example, Milwaukee does have a 12 volt system. So if I was to take a 12 volts in this scenario, like, like I have their heated jacket. It works on a 12 volt battery.
Mhm. Yep.
So I would be able to make something that I just clip that battery in, and it technically should work.
Yeah, should be a non-issue. Got to throw an extra little curveball at you. Most
Jesus.
sorry, most of your radios will operate on 13.8. But
Well, yeah, that's because an
12 works as
alternator's
well.
running. It's because most of them are for batteries when you're running. Yeah.
No, even like my Kenwood base station here likes 13.8. The power supply that I have here that switches the AC into DC pushes out 13.8. They're all happier on 13.8. They will run on 12 though. I just wanted to kind of mess with you for a second there. So
I mean, but like I was just curious. Like, I mean, if you're already gonna have 6 batteries in your
theory,
house,
it can be done. Yes. The other thing you got to keep in mind is the draw on some of these radios is pretty high. So some of them, depending if you're running like your HF rig at 100 watts, you're going to drain those little batteries down pretty quick. So keep that in mind. But in a pinch, right?
it may be worth looking into something.
It might be worth looking into. Yeah, you might. That might be all you have, right? So if you're always around in the truck, in the work truck, and that's what you always carry with you, having a way to adapt that into a power source to make your radio go, why not have it carry another battery with you as well? Then you got 2 options.
Well, yeah, I got like
And
6
plus
batteries
it's just
in the truck, and I've got the rapid
nerd.
charger that charges those little batteries in like 10 minutes, right? So it's like,
in a nerd kind of way, that's a fun project. So
well, right, like I know you have cordless tools, and I'm just like, okay, well, technically those are 18. Most of them, if you actually take multimeters and everything, they like the 20 volts don't actually run on 20 volts. Same with the 18. So I'm like, might be worth doing a draw test of being like, what's the actual current that comes out that you may not need to step it down, and it just being like, hey, take a 4 amp battery with you, make sure it's a good battery. It's not one of those that just dies instantly. Go test the radio out and be like, hey, I got 35 minutes of talk time on this battery.
Yep.
Well, it's good to know if you've always got batteries charged. Yeah. Just the thought that I'm
and
like.
It's a backup, right? So if you have a main battery that works, and then you always carry those with you anyways, have a way to use them. Why not? They're there. If you don't have the way to use them, that'll be the time where you're like, I really should have done that thing to learn how to use these, right?
Yeah.
So,
and it wouldn't be much to set up another ammo bin, those plastic ammo bins, seal it up and have those adapters. And I'm like, whatever, take $30, $40, $50 worth of product and, solder it in, put the switch in, and clip that battery in, and for the $50, you can get an extra 4 or 5 hours of talk time, or at least get that one important communication out. There's no sun out, and that solar charger ain't doing shit for you.
Nope. So get the word out and then be done, right? At least you got a little bit of messaging out there, and away you go.
Yeah, no. So I'm
Douglas
curious if
V.
you go down that
Amateur.
rabbit hole.
I might have to, because now I want to know. Douglas V. Amateur Radio and more mentions in the live chat. His boss has used 175 watt Milwaukee inverter to charge his laptop. So there you go.
Oh yeah, well, like the inverters are completely different than hooking up a battery.
Yeah,
they may take batteries, right? You might clip in 2-3 batteries, but all that inverter system you have bumps it down to a 12-volt system, 6-volt system, whatever amount of amps if you want to use wall plugs to charge a computer, whatever. But I'm talking about just taking, take a charger apart.
Direct. Yep.
Yeah, direct, like clip it, open up your ammo bin or your box or whatever you've got, and you clip in, whether it be a Milwaukee, DeWalt, Ryobi, Mastercraft, doesn't matter. Clip the battery in, flick the switch, and you can run the radio for 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 2 hours.
Long. Yep.
Yeah. Is it feasible? Is it an option? Yeah. So
now I'm curious.
I'm surprised.
It's totally an option. It can totally be. Well, I just went path of least resistance. I use the regular batteries. That'll just work. But you know what? It's a good point.
But I mean, how many times have you a battery that just all of a sudden crapped out?
It's happened. Absolutely has happened.
So you're like, you've got this kit, and I'm like, just all of a sudden it takes a crap.
I like it.
You've got that other one that might get some. I'm just, I'm like, hey, I don't want to go spend that battery because I've got 2 9-amp batteries. I've got 6, 4 5-amp batteries. I've got 6 3-amp batteries and a bunch of those. Where I'm just like, if I can do something, right? If I dump $20 now, I can make it work in an emergency. But also take the time where, if it gets into something, right? Like keep it cost effective or something to.
And you're learning a skill along the way.
Yeah, but also justify like, hey, I've got a bunch of batteries, and it's like I don't use them crazy often, but like when I need the batteries, I'm happy I have all of them. But for most of the part, they kind of sit around, and I'm just like, well, that's a lot of money, and they're eventually gonna go dead, where I'm gonna have to replace them. So it's like, if you can find another way, I'm very curious about it.
Oh, interesting. I'm going to have to play around now.
Nice.
All right. So just to kind of wrap things up, because we've talked, a little bit about the different types of radios, the different frequencies you can use, some monitoring and such, but real world emergency scenarios in Canada where ham radio kind of came in handy. So it's too bad Brad's not here tonight, because this was kind of the trigger for him to get into the preparedness world. But the ice storm in '98. Right.
Oh, I remember that. I got a week off of school.
Yeah. Sounds oddly familiar.
Yeah.
So ham radio was obviously essential during the devastating ice storm. Just again, providing that backup communication, because things were not good. Right. Power was down, infrastructure was down. But again, all you need to set up a working ham radio setup, I don't know if we touched on this 100%, but all you need is battery, radio, antenna, and away you go. You can talk to the world, right? So it's huge for emergency types of setups. Fort McMurray wildfires. Again, ham operators helped to coordinate evacuation efforts, relayed information to emergency response teams, and provided updates on shelter availability. And Lac-Mégantic train derailment. Again, ham radio operators helped with just bridging communication gaps. So again, relaying updates on evacuations, safety, coordinating with local responders, that kind of stuff. So a couple of Canadian stories for you in regards to where ham radio has been used. And you don't always hear about it, right? You don't hear the news talking about the ham operators being used in the background. So that's exactly where they operate, in the background. They just help bridge those gaps and make communication happen. So it's just a couple of Canadian examples there for you. And of course, we've got the North Carolina example in the States that just recently happened with that natural disaster and all the communication happening. A little bit more in the spotlight there because we've got technology now that lets the whole world listen in over the internet. But it's just kind of neat that we can fall in behind the scenes and help the communication happen when it can't because the infrastructure is down.
Yeah, I'm just happy none of the 3 articles involved maple syrup or igloos.
Oh, the operators needed somewhere to stay, and they needed something
and
to
drink.
eat. I figured that was just assumed. Because they live on. That's one requirement of being a ham operator in Canada. You need to have an igloo,
and you need to bathe in maple syrup.
You need to be able to chug maple syrup. We give you a liter container, and you have to be able to chug it within 15 seconds. And if you can't, you're out. So be ready for that in the exam as well. If you get a good examiner, they'll give you 20 seconds.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They might just pass you because you're like, look at this idiot.
Look at this. He actually did it. Any questions from the panel or the audience on some of the stuff we've gone over?
I've just got one quick one. You're doing both courses, the advanced as well as the regular ham. A lot of this, you clarified a few things for me. It still sounds complicated. Is it as complicated as it sounds once you get into, obviously you didn't get into the details like the book will get or the course will get about explaining some of the things, but like, is it fairly simple? A lot of people are worried about, hey, you need to know math equations. And I'm like, math equations can be simple as long as you have a formula and you know which criteria goes for one. If you've got 2, you can find the third. Yep. Doesn't matter where it is. So fantastic that as question. Well as how much of it do you actually use?
Fantastic questions. So you can go down the rabbit holes and take all that mathematics and all that electrical theory and all that you have to have a basic knowledge of to write the exam to get the questions right. And you can use that throughout your entire ham career and build out antennas that are resonant and are perfect. Well, no antenna is actually perfect, but just you can go down that rabbit hole and do all the math equations and do all the calculations and measure things out and use those skills and those things endlessly if that's your thing. If that's not your thing, you can take a wire, cut it to approximately the length that you think is going to work, put it in the tree, talk to the world. Either way. But you do need to know the safety part about working around power and electronics, because some of these devices, like the amplifier that's sitting in front of me, if I stick my hand in there in the wrong spot, it can kill me. Right? So you need to know about basic electrical safety and working around radio systems. You need to know some of that. But when you get into actually doing the thing, it depends on how far down the rabbit hole you want to go. If you want to just throw that antenna up in the air and start transmitting, go for it. Just make sure that it's, the SWR, like Jeff mentioned, is good, but you'll learn how to do that in the course as well. You can, like I said, you can nerd out as much as you want on the math stuff, or you can completely not use it ever again. I guess is the way that, is the way they answer that one. And the second question has escaped me.
You kind of answered both. I said you learn a bunch of the math, and I'm like, how much of it is actually useful? Is like you said, you need to understand the safety, but it's like, as long as you give me 2 out of the 3, I'll figure out the equation. Or if you give me 1, I might be able to figure out the other ones depending on how much info you give me. Like math is not a hard thing for me, but I was just like, I know it can be very heavy on that for part of the test. And
100%.
Just like school, I learned trigonometry. I was really good at it. I haven't used it since. Don't remember how to do it. Right? Like, so I'm like, is it like that, or serves a dual purpose where I'm like, you can go down the rabbit hole like you just explained, or it's one of those things where I'm like, you can just Google what antenna you should get.
Yeah, Anarchy Television has a good comment here. To build a half-wave dipole antenna, the equation is 468 divided by the frequency in megahertz. Easy equation, and there you go. You can build your own dipole antenna that way. That's
Yeah,
the other stuff is nice to know, but you don't have to be crazy about it. Or like you said, just go and buy a commercially available antenna, throw it in the tree, or you can just take a length of wire, toss it in the tree, see what happens.
Yeah.
You know, if you're feeling adventurous, away you go.
I mean, that's that when we do our parks on the air, that's usually what we do. It's just take an antenna, throw it up in the closest tree.
Yeah.
Done.
Okay.
Right. So
yeah,
and that's a wire antenna for you, those that are trying to picture that. It's just a long length of wire. We toss one end of the wire up into the tree, the other end we connect to the radio, and then away we go. So it's not like a big piece of metal antenna or something we're just tossing in a tree. It's the end of a wire. All kinds of different antennas, and that is a huge rabbit hole that we could go down, but we won't for this episode.
Because that's going to confuse me so much more than we already are. You answered some questions, but I'm still confused.
Yeah. And I see Douglas V Amateur Radio again. It's mentioning DIY antennas. You get an antenna analyzer. 100% you do. Those will help tell you that you're in the ballpark of where you want to be for being able to transmit on them and such. But that's a whole other rabbit hole. The stuff you learn in the course is handy. It's good to know, especially the safety stuff, basic operations stuff, how to transmit, how to put your call sign out there, how to kind of program your radio. All that kind of stuff is really, really good to know. The mathematics, if that's a thing that scares you, 1 + 1 is 7 in my world, and I still made it through up to the advanced, so you'll be fine, Pierre.
Well,
right.
2
Any
+
other
2
questions
= 4
before
because
we,
I'm racist, apparently.
Oh boy, we're getting into Monday night.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the live chat or the panel?
No, that's about it for me. You answered a few questions. It's
Cool.
still a thing I want to go down. I've said it for about 1.5 years now, and I still haven't done shit about it, but I'll get there at some
You'll
point.
get there.
Yeah.
You'll get there. You got a lot going on right now.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's again a good little recap on ham radio, how it can kind of apply to you and how to basically get involved in some of the bare bones basics about frequencies and just setting things up and getting ready. So as always, any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I can do another episode where we expand on certain areas. If anyone's interested, just throw the word in. It's feedback@prepperpodcast.ca, and happy to nerd out more specific sections, or do another episode on just the basics if anyone's interested. I'm sure we will again, because
At some
we
point.
always fill an episode every once in a while with this, because it's usually a popular episode. But I see I've droned on for about 1:22, so we should probably move on to the podcast challenge. And I see that Terry has something. Actually, sorry, I just jumped right into upcoming events, and I read podcast challenge and just went right into upcoming events. So podcast challenge is just figure out the repeater that's in your area. And if you've got a handheld radio, figure out how to program it in and listen to it. If you're licensed, transmit and say hello. Because there's nothing worse than a mic fright. It's a thing. But getting that first transmission out there and having somebody else come back kind of takes it away pretty quick. So figure out what repeaters are in your area, get a handheld programmed into it, and just listen and transmit if you're licensed. Okay, now we can get into upcoming events. So I see Terry, who decided to bail on us because his Ford, had the tow truck show up. Finally, he's been waiting for about 7 hours. Has in here the annual Preppers Meet. It's coming up July 10th to 13th, 2025. So he mentions that it's at the liberty to say right now it's going to be a stellar event. I don't disagree with that comment, because it has been all the years I've been going. So mark the date in your calendars, tune in for updates, and prepare to attend. I see the pun he put in there too. Prepare. Well done, Terry. Hope his Ford's in the back of the tow truck by now.
Yeah. Probably getting charged extra because it's the Ford.
Oh, guaranteed. Yeah, there's a surcharge.
And I've got a quick one here. If anybody is interested, under upcoming events, there is a free food preservation online course. It is put on by the North Dakota State University. It's a free course. You have to be signed up by November 15th and complete the course by January 15th. I believe there's 5 modules. They talk about canning, water bathing, dehydrating. There's a couple others. I don't think they touch on freeze drying, but basically food preservation. So I'm going to sign up for it and take it. The price is right. It's free. So if you're interested, that's something you're interested in, go check it out.
Yeah, and I mean, even if you only want one section of it, it's free. It can cost you anything. Like the resources are there. Figure out how to do it. We've got some dehydrators. I wouldn't mind touching base and finessing some of those things. We've done pretty good with most of it, but hey, that's something. Water bathing's another thing. We don't have a pressure canner. We don't have this, but you can get some free knowledge to fine tune some things. Might not be bad, for sure.
Yep.
Free is a good price.
Yep. The only thing better is if they pay you to take it.
Well, they pay you with knowledge for free.
Yeah, but I mean like cash, so I can go buy grapes at $15 a fucking bag.
She's not gonna
So
let that
I'll
go,
jump
are you?
right in into my weather blurb. So it's kind of been a weird few weeks, shall we say. Obviously, we went through the couple of hurricanes in close proximity to each other. Then we've had a fairly period of a dry spell. We've gone more than 3 days without a severe weather warning in the lower 48. That is going to change. I'll get into that. But I am watching a tropical wave that's trying to form in the Caribbean. And I say that it's trying to form. There's lots of uncertainty as to whether it's even going to form, the track, the strength, etc. However, sadly, we're already getting people on social media that are fear-mongering that this is going to be another Florida hurricane. Take that with a grain of salt. Know your sources. What I'm looking at with steering currents and upper level wind patterns and all that stuff, I think the storm is going to happen. I highly doubt that Florida will be in any danger. Things can change. They do. But right now, outside of that storm, it'll probably hit Cuba and Jamaica, but there's nothing leading me to believe that Florida's in the target. Just pay attention. It's sort of trying to develop. Should know something better by middle of the week, but again, just be careful what you're hearing on social media.
As always.
Like I said, we haven't had a severe weather warning in the U.S. for 3 days. That is going to change as we now see the battle between summer and fall or winter. And as such, these clashes lead to severe storm development when the cold front dips south and clashes with the warmer Gulf air. Some people refer to this as tornado season number 2. Basically, it's no different than what happens in the spring. In the spring, you've got the cold air from the winter. You've got the warm air trying to move up and warm things up. And where those two collide, that's where you get the serious storms. This is just the opposite. You've got the warm air in place and you've got the cold air trying to trench its way down with the cold front and the dry lines. And again, that's where you get the storms. So be wary of them. Tuesday, Wednesday, I think is going to shape up to be a pretty stormy day, especially over the South Central and the Central Plains area. So we're talking Minnesota, Nebraska, South Dakota, maybe even down far south as Oklahoma, Kansas, those places. The storms will move to the east on Thursday into the Ohio Valley. I think they're going to lose a lot of their intensity. However, the probability for storms is still there. It's low, but it's still there. And lastly, especially in the higher elevations, we are starting to see the white stuff. There's starting to be some winter storm warnings going on, some things like that. I see Eric shaking his head. He's not a happy camper. So as we've discussed in a previous episode, if you don't have your vehicle ready for the winter, you might want to not wait very much longer. If you've got summer tires on your vehicle, or even all seasons for that part. In my opinion, they're not an all season, they're a 3-season, but that once temperatures get below 7 degrees, the grip on those tires starts to not be as good. So get your winter tires on and get your kits in your vehicle.
So Douglas V Amateur Radio and more in the live chat mentions that it's still almost 100 degrees Fahrenheit in Phoenix as the high.
Yep. And it'll stay that way for a
Pierre
while,
sending
probably.
a silent message there.
You know. Yep.
Send some of the heat this way. We will take it.
Yes.
I don't want the snow.
Yep.
My snowmobile died a long time ago. I don't need snow anymore.
Nope.
All right. Well, with that, I'll bring episode number 251 of the Canadian Prepper Podcast to an end. You can find the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, of course, your favorite podcast app. I'm pretty sure we're on all of them now. Please do take a minute to submit a review wherever it is you're listening. It does encourage the algorithm and, promotes us for at least 2 seconds. And then the algorithm changes because they realize what we're talking about. But it does help other people find the show for that short period of time.
And we do record these shows live on YouTube, Facebook, if we have to, which we do. If you want an early peek at the shows, please subscribe to the YouTube channel, Canadian Prepper Podcast. Click the notifications tab. That will give you an alert when we're going live. If anybody wants to reach out to me, it's feedback@prepperpodcast.ca, or I am frequently on the Discord. If you're not on it, get your butt over there.
As for myself, off the wall customizing, I think we still got an email. We might be on social medias. I don't know. Occasionally on the Discord or Monday nights on the other CPP, where you can hear me critiquing on the government and probably use more swear words than I do tonight.
Is that possible? It is. I've heard you on Monday night.
Guaranteed.
All right. So please check out Rapid Survival at rapidsurvival.com. You can get me there on the live chat. You can also probably find me hanging out on 20 meters on ham radio or VHF repeaters in and around the Barrie Aurelia area. Thanks for joining us. Until next time, be prepared, stay safe,
and keep learning.